Let us pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, you who are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, many of you know that I grew up in Hawaii. I spent my first 21 years of ministry as a United Methodist pastor, serving 3 different congregations there. My family moved to the Hawaiian Islands in the summer of 1983. I was about to start my sophomore year of high school. The earliest people to come to Hawaii were the Polynesians, who traveled there by voyaging canoes from the South Pacific sometime between 1200 and 1300 in the Common Era. These Polynesian navigators relied on the observation of stars, the ocean swells, bird migrations, and other natural cues to navigate across thousands of miles of open ocean. In 1975, the Polynesian Voyaging Society formed, and they built a sailing vessel called Hokulea, or Star of Gladness. It was a way of reviving the legacy of exploration, courage, and ingenuity that brought the first Polynesians to the archipelago of Hawaii. The Hokulea is a double-hulled, long-range voyaging canoe with a platform between the 2 hulls for the crew to stand on and to be on as a part of their voyage. The first trip in 1976 was to the islands of Tahiti and back, and it was a tremendous success. More than 17,000 people in Tahiti were waiting for them when they arrived on June 4th, 1976. And over the next 25 years, Hokulea made a number of long-distance voyages, each helping to train new travelers in open ocean seafaring techniques. Their primary navigational technique was celestial navigation, or being guided by the stars. And Hokulea became an inspiration to so many of the people of Hawaii as they reconnected with the ancient art of following the stars. Nainoa Thompson, a native Hawaiian, was the first modern Hawaiian to master the traditional Polynesian wayfaring techniques, and he has been instrumental in reviving this nearly lost art. Under his guidance, Hokulea has not only become a symbol of Hawaiian pride, but also a beacon of hope for environmental and cultural preservation worldwide. So welcome to the 5th and final edition of our December sermon series entitled Masterpiece, the Christmas edition. Now, technically, this was our Advent series for 2024, Advent being the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. And we're no longer in Advent, as you're well aware, but it's still Christmastide. As Don mentioned earlier, the 12 days of Christmas isn't just a song, it's an actual thing, right? Christmas season runs until January 6th, Epiphany. So today, you get the last installment of our Masterpiece series, but it's kind of the beginning of a twofer. We'll examine the story of the 3 wise men, or Magi, who, like Nainoa Thompson, knew the art of celestial navigation. But really, it's just part 1, because Jody, John, and Joanne and I are traveling this week to Texas to spend a belated Christmas celebration with both of our children and their families. So my friend, the Reverend Matt Sargent, and his wife Lori are going to be here next Sunday. Matt preached earlier this fall. You may have remembered him. And Matt also will be preaching on Epiphany, and it's the story also of the 3 Magi. So I'm going to give a quick intro into the story, but go deeper into the masterpiece portion of the series, and Pastor Matt will give you a bit of a deeper dive into the Magi themselves next week. Our masterpiece painting for today is The Adoration of the Magi by Leonardo da Vinci. And yes, it's supposed to be a bit dark and hard to see. I'll explain more about that in a moment. But before we get into the specifics of the painting itself, let's go back to the main characters today in our Bible story from Matthew chapter 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born, King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage." Now, the heroes in today's story have been misnamed the 3 kings, or the 3 wise men, for centuries, right? thanks in part to the King James Version of the Bible and the fact that they brought 3 gifts. But the reality is Matthew doesn't specify how many there were who came. We just assume 3 because there were 3 gifts. But they were most definitely not kings. Pastor Matt will share more about their background next Sunday, but Matthew tells us that they were Magi. Biblical scholar Richard Vincent tells us that the term Magi comes from the Latin word magus, but it's also traced back to the Greek word magos, and that's where we get the words magician or sorcerer, or one who is wise in reading the stars and the signs of the times. In Media and Persia, from well before the time of the New Testament, such men were seen as almost like a priestly class of people, and they specifically connected and served kings. Now, these Magi have been on a journey for some time, and they arrived in Jerusalem when Herod the Great was the king, and they asked a seemingly innocent enough question. At this time in history, the new stars that were formed heralded the birth of kings. So they asked, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews?" But Herod the Great was a puppet king of the Roman Empire. He had been given the title King of the Jews, and what's funny was he was only really half Jewish, a hybrid king, if you will, and he was not especially loved by the Jewish people, according to biblical scholars. He was a ruthless, paranoid narcissist who spilled blood all throughout his reign. Is it any wonder that a king like that would feel immediately threatened by the question, "Hey, where's the child that's been born King of the Jews?" Right? When there's already a king, there is no room for another one. And to ask such a question immediately puts the life of this newborn in danger. It's the first indication in the gospel of the hostility that the life of Jesus will evoke from so many throughout his entire ministry. Verses 3 and 4, when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. So the guests asked the king about the Messiah, where would he be born? Herod panics in fear, first of all, because he was not born King of the Jews. That was a title that was given him by Mark Antony in 40 BCE. But second, Herod is afraid because he doesn't even have a clue of to where the Messiah is going to be born. So he turns to his advisors, chief priests and scribes, and asks them about the Messiah. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, the term King of the Jews is what Matthew uses for Messiah. But Matthew never uses that term again until Pilate judges and executes Jesus at the end of his gospel. You might wonder why all of Jerusalem would be frightened along with Herod. Well, Herod was notorious for killing anyone who got in his way, including 2 of his own sons that he thought wanted to maneuver their ways into his throne. So when a leader like that gets upset, you never quite know what to expect. Thus, all of Jerusalem was frightened with him. Herod learns from his advisors that the place that they're looking for is a little town called Bethlehem, just about 6 miles or so south of Jerusalem. Verse 7. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may go and pay him homage." Biblical scholar R. Alan Culpepper makes the point that if the Magi were naive enough to ask about the one born King of the Jews in Jerusalem, then Herod is equally naive to trust that these foreigners would actually return with news of this newborn king. Verse 9, when they had heard the king, the Magi set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. If the first part of this story revealed the hostility that Jesus' life would bring, then the second half of the story reveals the proper response to Jesus, and that is worship. These Magi kneel before this newborn king. They offer their gifts. Now, some have speculated that these gifts reflected the wealth of the Magi, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Others say, no, it's reflecting the worth of the child that they have come to visit. And though he may already be a king in Jerusalem, there may already be a king in Jerusalem through Herod, Jesus is the true king who will be just about the exact opposite of who Herod is. Jesus will be the Prince of Peace. Now, we're going to stop here with the worshiping of the Messiah by the Magi, and we're going to transition to our masterpiece for today. This is Leonardo da Vinci's The Adoration of the Magi. And yes, it doesn't look like any of the other paintings we've journeyed through this season. It looks like it's been left out in someone's barn and neglected over the years. Well, keep that in mind as I tell you a bit more about Da Vinci himself. Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15th in 1452 in Vinci, Italy, as the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant mother. He received his basic education in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but early on, Leonardo showed a talent for drawing. At age 14, he began apprenticing under the artist Adoration in Florence. He spent several years learning painting, sculpture, and mechanical arts under Verrocchio's guidance. And by his early 20s, Leonardo was contributing to Verrocchio's works and developing his own artistic style. A true Renaissance man in the best sense of the term, Da Vinci lived a life of curiosity and creativity. He studied anatomy, geology, botany. He produced detailed drawings and observations of everything that he was learning. He designed flying machines and hydraulic systems, military devices, all kinds of inventions, many of which were never actually built. Leonardo is celebrated as one of history's most brilliant minds, and he blended art and science in ways that profoundly influenced both of those disciplines. Well, in 1481, at age 29, Da Vinci is commissioned by the Augustinian monks of Santo Donato in Scopito, Italy, near Florence, to create an altarpiece depicting the adoration of the Magi from Matthew chapter 2. The work was meant to be a high altar centerpiece for their monastery church, and it was to underscore the importance of this biblical scene in Christian art. Now, at this point in his career, Leonardo is eager to establish himself as a leading artist in Florence. He was in his late 20s, and he began this painting, and he undertook to finish it within 30 months in order to celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany, not only with the coming of the Magi, but when all would come and celebrate the call of responding to Jesus. This particular piece is oil on a panel of wood. It's approximately 8 feet square. It's very large. But just a year later, Leonardo left Florence for Milan, lured by the prestigious opportunity to work for Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. And Da Vinci was able there in Milan to not only pursue painting, but also engineering, architecture, and science. And this move marked a significant milestone and turning point in Leonardo's career. He spent nearly 2 decades there in Milan, and he created such works as The Last Supper while he was there. So he abandoned this commissioning for the Adoration of the Magi. So what you're looking at is actually an unfinished work by Da Vinci. But because it's unfinished, it gives us a rare glimpse into his creative process and revealing his preliminary sketches and his experimentation with perspective and with his composition of a painting. It's housed in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and this piece suffered extensive damage and deterioration over the centuries for a number of reasons. First, there were the environmental factors, right? Exposure to humidity, temperature fluctuations, light that faded it. Then there were previous restoration attempts, and they tried to preserve the painting with layers of varnish and overpainting, and it effectively really obscured Leonardo's original details. And then finally, it's the materials themselves just aged, right? It was a wooden panel that he originally painted on. It developed cracks, and the paint layers started flaking off. So in 2011, a new restoration process was attempted. And this involved infrared reflectography, pigment analysis. They took layers, they removed layers of dirt and varnish and overpainting without damaging the original paint. The wooden panels were stabilized, cracks were filled in to prevent further deterioration. And when all this was completed, in 2017, it revealed or uncovered Leonardo's intricate preparatory sketches and shadings, and it highlighted his creative process and his creative vision, and this is what it looks like now. So let's talk about it, shall we? The primary technique that Leonardo da Vinci used to start this piece is called underpainting. Underpainting is where an artist creates a preliminary layer of paint on a surface as a base layer for subsequent layers to be added down the road. Now, this initial layer establishes the composition, the tones, the values of the artwork, and it serves as a guide for the artist's final painting. It's often done in monochrome, using one color such as brown, gray, or blue. And then thin washes or glazes are applied to avoid texture that might interfere with other layers as they're placed on. Now, one of the insights that we get from this, seeing the early stages of this painting, is that Da Vinci is someone who looks at and understands anatomy and nature. Now remember, he wasn't just a painter. He was also a scientist and an engineer. And even when he's painting clothes, you see that he's working on the skeletal structure of the people that he's painting. Look at the figures here to the right. And this person looks almost like if he's just a skull there, right? It was as if Leonardo started with the bones and then moved outwards in the painting process. And then he would add hair and clothing and color. By the way, this group of people off to the right side of the painting is often referred to as the philosophers. Well, looking at the piece as a whole, there are a couple of shapes that our eyes are initially drawn to. Now, the people in the bottom half of the painting are gathered in a bit of a semicircle with Mary and baby Jesus at the centerpiece. Now, however, Mary and the Christ child and the Magi that are kneeling at their feet form a pyramid or a triangular shape in the picture. Now, art historians tell us that this shape is often found in paintings of the High Renaissance period, including one of Da Vinci's most famous paintings, The Last Supper. And this pyramid or triangular shape is something that tends to draw the viewer's eye to what's most important in a piece, especially in a piece where there's a lot going on, which is definitely the case in The Last Supper and in the case of the Adoration of the Magi. Now, the Magi have gathered around the Messiah and his mother. They're kneeling down to pay him homage, as Matthew's gospel puts it. But it's really kind of a chaotic picture, isn't it? I mean, if you look at it, in the top right of the painting, there's a battle that's taking shape. Two horses and their riders rearing up in battle. This could symbolize the tumultuous state of the world before the coming of Christ, maybe the ultimate battle between good and evil that has been carried on a cosmic level since the beginning of time. Over on the left, there's the battle. Sorry about that. Over on the left side of the painting, we see the ruins of some kind of classical structure. Now, some art historians believe this is a Roman temple that in its ruined state may symbolize the decline of the pagan, old pagan world and the rise of Christianity. Da Vinci actually did some wonderful preliminary drawings in preparation for this particular piece. But clearly, the focus of this unfinished masterpiece takes us back down to Mary and Jesus. And look throughout the crowd of the onlookers, the incredible range of emotions that Da Vinci has painted on their faces. from awe and reverence to skepticism, possibly even disdain. Again, it's reflective of the reaction that the world will have to Jesus over the course of his entire life and ministry. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see how Da Vinci would have chosen to finish this piece? Verses 11 and 12 from Matthew 2. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. And then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. These foreign astronomers who had seen a celestial body in the night sky that piqued their curiosity, they followed it all the way to a little town of Bethlehem, their bodies leading them to where their hearts and minds had first ventured. These pagan magi, having bowed down in reverent worship before this newborn child, placed their valuable gifts at his feet, now are sent home by another road, not to cross paths with the sinister King Herod again. And why did they do this? Because the Spirit of God intervened in their lives and offered them a new direction. Interesting, isn't it, to think that God chose to communicate directly through these unnamed pagan individuals from far, far away. The prophet Isaiah in the Hebrew Scriptures in chapter 60 said this, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, thick darkness over the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. So lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away. Your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you, young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense. They shall proclaim the praise of the Lord." The Magi may not have been kings, but it is clear that the gift of Christ's birth is for everyone, even those who may not ever consider themselves people of faith. Whoever's hearts are open to God's Spirit, God is leading, always leading us into God's presence. I've really enjoyed this series. I hope you have as well. Thanks be to God for the master painters who have also been open to God's Spirit and using the gifts that they have been given to help us draw deeper connections to the ultimate gift of Christmas. Amen.